Klal Yisrael, zehnige Tausend in Hände schieben, der ganze Welt, in der Rav Auerbach Schlitt, das Machase Kashrus für Klal Yisrael, der alle Juren, ist ein gewaltiger Kuvert für uns, und der Schied, der wird haben sein, der Sofa von Englisch, der jeder soll verstehen. I have the cover the Koran upon Rav Yechezkel Auerbach, Kashrus, administrator of the KSA, who always mechazik tens of thousands Eden through English Torah all over the world to be covered for us to speak about Kashrus, לפסח, ולכל השנה. Rav Yechezkel Auerbach שליט.
Pesach in Bechvedach, the Kehillah here of Stone and the Mishpacha of the Bald Mishpacha, which are they're mishtadel in a way which is beyond what one could possibly even expect to be marbitz Torah in a hafludik way, and the Kodesh Baruch Hu should keep that in mind. There's an interesting pasuk in this week's parsha where it's talking about their kabbanas. It says v'chol chatas asher yovo dama el oil moyed lechaper b'kodesh lo seyochel. There is a halacha. Every type of carbon has its own place, and if you go out of that place, you passel the carbon. And it says, but the dam of the chatas, if you bring it inside, closer in than it was supposed to be, the whole carbon is puzzled. So my father Zechron Baruch asked a simple question. He says, why should this be? You would think that fakert, the aggressor is trebung, that he wouldn't get closer. The Torah is telling us that every person has their own ma'amad. Every person has their own shlav of how they're supposed to grow, where they're supposed to grow, what they're supposed to do. It's a springen of hechsher stiegen, for a person to go where he's not supposed to be, for a person to try to wrap themselves in layers that are not bakfem, and they don't shtimzach with this whole aveda, it's a puzzle of carbon. You think it's a carbon, but it's a puzzle of carbon. And I just wanted to start by laying out two pashita nekudas. And one is that just like every person understands that when you ask a shaila and a rav is machriya lekula, a kula has to have a well-founded and an oisgetrachte understanding in halacha, and it has to be based in mamoshes before you can have a kula. A chumrah needs the same amount of thought. A person stam to go and trachtais, let's be machmer. It feels so much better to say this is usher. It feels so frum to go say that we can't do this, we can't do that. That also has no vert. That also has no Torah. That also has no basis in halacha. And just before, if we don't get to it at the end, I am nishtaimim that I just wanted to bring it up again. I've mentioned it last year, that it comes after Pesach. There are people that don't sell chametz. This is a wonderful thing. We know that chametz and sa'or and the sa'or shebe'isa and everything that it's everything that it represents, the sfas emes, everybody knows that. And a person should take a oisraim in all the chametz he possibly can. But you have erlicha balabatim, people that have grocery stores. The single biggest purchase that Yidden make is when they go shopping after Pesach, and you have erlicha Yidden. They went to the Rabbanim and they sold their chametz kedas gedin as evis steht in halacha, and they're doing the right thing. And so for 3 or 4 weeks after Pesach, people go running to give goyim their business, and the chametz that you're buying by the goyim were probably by a fry yid not being sold on Pesach anyways. And mahalzach of grayson that you have accomplished something, that you're not buying chametz that was sold. So instead of the mitzvah d'oraisa of a chayachicha imach of giving another year parnasa, you go to a guy and you buy his chametz that was probably by a yid. It doesn't make any sense. But ask your own Rav. The first thing that I just follow orders here, and Rabbi Bald had a list of things he wanted me to discuss. The first he has here is wines from all over the world. I just want to give you just a snapshot. People, when it comes to flesh, And a person is supposed to be careful. A person is supposed to know what his minig is. There are different minhagim, sai benigay, the shchita, sai benigay, the nikur. There are different types of hanhagas that people have, gesundheit. And people, they farshais every last detail about the sheichtim and the makim, the butchers and da. When it comes to wine, you walk into stores and there is wine from all over the world that since Sheshes Mei Bereshis, they haven't had a million Yidden there. And truth be told, wine is the single most difficult hashgacha to give, much more than shchita. And if the Gemara says that Rav Mitzuyin Eitzel Shchita Mumchem Heim and Rav Beheim Ksheris, that means that the Torah and the klolim of Rav, you can assume that if somebody's giving you a piece of flesh and he says this is kosher, al pi halacha, you're allowed to believe it's kosher. I'm not telling you to eat it, but yeah, this is what you can do. It doesn't say that by wine. And yet by wine, they have places from South America, South Africa, all over Azerbaijan, places that you can't even pronounce the words. And who is doing the hashgacha? Because in a blick, when you have the wine, before it's made, we'll talk about bishul shortly, but certainly before it's mevushal, if the meshkiach hat sich eingedrimmelt for a moment, and the guy in the winery, he's going about his business because 364 days a year he makes not kosher wine, and he goes and he knows that this is the valve. When it comes to this part of the process, he has to turn this valve, and when he comes into the silo and he has to take a sample like this and he turns such a valve and such a valve, even according to the Shach, who is more makel with Nigi al Dei Davar Acher, if a guy turns a spigot to take a sample, when he closes that spigot, it's called ne'emad, it's called kaichai, so it's negia, not only Dei Davar Acher, it's negia b'kaichai, and everything in that vat becomes not kosher. And people they just take it from anywhere and everywhere. They never heard of the hashgacha. They don't know how well the hashgacha is doing there. They have no idea who the mashgichim are. They have no idea. They don't foreshais how many mashgichim. I've seen crushes that people think they can just get away. They have one mashgiach. They don't want to spend money on a lot of it. They have one mashgiach, and he'll valgezich, he'll dreizich, he'll make sure everything's running. It's absolutely impossible, and it's very very simple for things to go wrong, and it's a chiyuv. It's not a suggestion. It's a chiyuv on every person to farshais from the rabbanim hamachshirim that they have to know that people are watching, and people aren't just going to walk into a wine store and take something off the shelf because it has a hechsher on it. And bechlal, in this nice befrat, that Rabbanim HaMachshirim have to be trained that they can expect phone calls from people to ask questions about what they do. To ask, if not from people individually, from Rabbanim, you should go to your Rav. The Rav should ask the Rav Machshir. A Rav Machshir who will not answer questions about what they do to another Rav has no business being in business. There is no such thing as a kabel daiti. There's no such thing as a Rav Machshir who has a blank check and he can say, I'm giving hashgacha, everybody has to use what it is. You have to, now, he can't be expected, he doesn't have to say the same drasha 400 times, everybody's call him every day. But certainly, Rabbanim have a responsibility to hold Rabbanim HaMachshirim responsible. It used to be, even in Kamat in our living lifetime, that there were real kehillas in Europe where the Rav was the Rav, the Bezdin was the Bezdin, and what they said went, that's what it was. But now it's a geschäft like any other geschäft, and you have to hold them responsible for what they're doing.
Which wines does the Rav recommend?
There are wines from Eretz Yisrael with the bedats, and wines from Eretz Yisrael befrat are very slippery because people say, oh, why should I spend a lot of money on something like Tepperberg or Zamora? I know which Yekiv it comes from. I know that they go and they harvest in such and such a vineyard, and I know the other guy does it, he uses the same vineyard, so it must be okay. That's a big mistake because in Eretz Yisrael, befrat, they do a lot of the people that take care of the vines know that if they keep on grafting, they do harkava on the vines, because whenever you do a harkava, you give it new life, and it blasts it up again. It lives more. So there's constantly a concern that they're going to be grafting the vineyards and the vines into one another. The Eda has a spreadsheet where they have numbers. Mendy, right? Thank you. They have a spreadsheet where they have literally numbers on each of the vineyard and each of the vines, and they have a cheshbon, and the mashgiach doesn't just sit and watch what are they crushing the grapes. He's out in the fields making sure that the vintners did not go and do any asik with the vines that would have puzzled it for another 4 years. That you cannot use the 3 years of Arla and the 4th year of Netiravai. And this is something that has to be kept on top of. Coming from Eretz Yisrael, there are wines in Baruch Hashem, there's more of them that have the Eda, that are very careful, and Rabbi Avram Rubin's called B'das Mahadran. These are two very, very good. He used to be the OU. He used to be the OU. No, I don't know if he was ever with the Eda, but he was? Okay. From Europe, there are two very good hashgachas. One is Meshech Chaim Zekbach. He yarshened the Geschäft from his father. Somebody's disagreeing. That in my experience with Rabbi Zekbach, he is a Baki Nifla. He is a Reshkel of stuff that they're learning. They're putting out an encyclopedia on Hilchas Yayin, and is very, very careful with what he does. There's another hashgacha from Rabbi Mordechai Rothenberg from Paris. These two are also as of last year, the Hisachtis started working together with Rabbi Zekbach also, and they have other wines that they bring their own crew, their own mashgichim in to do oversight on their wines. But before we get any further, there's an important nice about wine that is often overlooked because people assume that it's mevushal. And it is true that Reb Moshe has a very lengthy tshuva about bishul, that 165 is enough, even pasteurization. The Tzelem Rav also has a tshuva like that. However, people should be aware that the lashon of the Chacham Sadam, we've spoken about it before, in his Akdama to Hilchas Yayin, this is the lashon of the Chacham Sadam. Ha'isur chomer ma'oid, v'hashoyse stam yenam, oiker nishmasoi mimakam shenishrish by HaKedusha. I do not believe that Chacham Sadam uses that lashon anywhere ever else in the entire Sefer. And in Yayin Nesach, you would think that after a phrase that Chas v'shalom, a person's neshama is ne'ekar from its sharish of kedusha, a person would look for extra chumras rather than kulas. And here's the concern: there's a machlekes. It's brought down. There are days of what's called mavushal. What does mavushal do? Why is it a mutter for a guy to touch wine, or at least you lose the concern of maga akum from a guy after bishul? So there is a rush that says that the reason is because it is a milsa l'shchicha to have yayin mavushal, and since it's a milsa l'shchicha, it goes berabanan. There is, and now that we get to what bishul accomplished, what it has to do to be considered mavushal, there are a number of shittas brought down. One is that it has mala avabois, which is the general rule. If you don't know, that's why. In halacha, there are very, very few technical guidelines. Most of halacha are guidelines that a person can do without instruments, without thermometers and things like that. So if it's malavabois, it has to be boiling. Another criterion that's used for bishul is that it has to be nismat machmas chaymai, which means that it loses some of its volume. That means it's nikrash. It's fatzomt. It's somewhat diminished. And the third shear is that the shear is nishtana l'grayusa. It does not taste as fulsome and as well as it did before. Reb Shlomo Zalman, Reb Eliashiv, and Reb Ovadia Yosef all say that pasteurization does not meet any of those criteria. First of all, the rush that it's milsa l'shchicha, since most wines are pasteurized, so they say b'chal. Though calling it mevushal does not help in order to shield it from maga akum. And the way that pasteurization works, especially flash pasteurization, it loses nothing. And since it's a closed system under pressure, it's never malava boys. And unless you open the valve to release some of the essence and the steam, it's not going to be nismat ma'maschami, you're not going to lose any volume, and they're careful that it shouldn't change the taste either. So a person that wants to be not crazy machmer, but to check most of the boxes and not all the boxes, should be concerned that even something that's called mavushal al yidei fuster, by pasteurization, it's not clear that that is considered mavushal. Speak to your Rav about that. The next one, there's been a rash that even national kashrus organizations have limited the beer. Here's Pashut, and we'll go that together with the whiskeys and vodkas. Yidden, Baruch Hashem, are very, very upgehitten in kashrus, and they're very concerned to make sure that not only the major ingredients, but even minor ingredients, and with the visual things that, and Baruch Hashem, things are picking up, and more upgehitten, the hashgachas are getting more and more geschäft. But for some reason, one area of simchas that has been totally overlooked is alcoholic beverages, is schnapps and beer and things like that, which is, everybody always assumed that beer, what is it? Beer is made out of barley and it's made of hops, and you cook it up and you let it sit, and that's what it is. The truth is that it used to be like that, but these new Michigasim with these craft breweries where they have, I tell you, I went into a brewery outside Lakewood. A friend of mine asked me, he wanted to make a special run of beer, it's called coffee stout. He wanted to give a shlachmana, so I went to a brewery to go meet with the guy. So the guy says, it's very funny. I said, just finished cleaning up my lines. He says, it was right after Thanksgiving. He says, there's a family over here locally. They bring every year, and this is a craft brewery where they will brew whatever you'd like. He says they bring a tub of turkey schmaltz every year, and they make a run of turkey schmaltz beer for their Thanksgiving meal for their family. And the kalim, mamish belua, with mamish, it's mamish treif. That means that anything downstream of that, till you kasher it, is mamish treif. It's not mahadrin, it's mamish treif. And when I looked over the records, many, and this was another place also, many of the way that it works is you need sugars to start the fermentation. And the cheapest, most fermentable sugars that they have on the market today is something called lactose. Lactose is very cheap. It's the milk sugar that you separate out of whey. And many of these craft breweries are using lactose as a starter sugar for their fermentation. And it's milchik. It's worse than that. It's gvinas akum. There's no hechsher. Nobody's matter. Gvinas akum is a Rebbeinu Yerucham about whey, mei mechalav, but l'maisa, there's nobody that's matter something like that. So certainly beers are something, and they found a couple of years ago that Budweiser, Mirav Chachmasm, suddenly realized that there's a lot of Mexicans in the United States. And in the Haim, they used to drink a beer that had clam juice. It's mamish sheretz hamayim, and it's an isa deraisa. And they started making beer with this clam juice in it. Baruch Hashem, they worked that out. But l'maisa, you see that it's not, everybody assumes what can be the problem. The only reason you think there's no problem is you haven't seen the problem yet. But there's always a problem lurking, and certainly that. And for instance, everybody used to know that the only schnapps that you had to be concerned with wine barrels, aging in wine barrels of scotch, for years, for generations. Everybody knows that, that's scotch, so you didn't drink scotch, or you relied on whatever you want to rely on. But right now, because it's so, scotch sells so much wine, so bourbon, they started aging it in wine barrels. Certain Feinschmecker beers, they started aging in wine barrels. And there are other things also. So all these things, so the major organizations have gotten together over the last couple of years to move towards this, of saying this stuff, that we will not allow something that does not have a hashgacha. And it makes sense. You wouldn't allow if somebody came in, and they're going to get to the other part about party planners. There's a klol l'shein iksuv b'sefer Torah azos, which is called party planners. Party planners get paid to make the Baal Simcha happy. They don't care They don't care how they do that. And if they have a new mishigas that they'll bring in, or they found somebody that makes these kitschy type of candies, or they bake ich weiß nicht was, and they'll get it and they'll bring it and they'll charge them. The person will be misameach, and then they'll go to, and there is no concern of kashrus. And that's why a person is thinking that they're doing everybody a favor by being misameach them, by having all these fancy little things. The party planners, it's a barber shusarabim, because many hechsherim come out of these type of things. Now, when people come along, and just as you would not allow a party planner to bring in stuff without a hechsher, so you shouldn't be bringing in any schnapps without a hechsher. Now, it took this long, very simply, because there previously, it was a takana the chain Rav Yechezkel, because there wasn't enough there. But Baruch Hashem, now there is plenty. The CRC in Chicago and the Star K have voluminous lists of approved schnapses and things like that. If a person needs more than that's on the list, they really need to see a therapist anyways. Shchitas. There's nothing good to say. I mean, you can have a debate if there's some good and there's some bad. They are, unless the party planner has an eingeschlossene hechsher, not just some guy, you daven, your husband davens my shul, good, you can do whatever you want. I can tell you, in the Yiddish, it used to be that if a person didn't come to the Rav with a shaila at least once in 2 weeks, the Rav would come say, well, you don't keep kosher anymore? Like, well, you don't have shilas? I can tell you, what happens is, in a Yiddish home, where I have, Baruch Hashem, have children, they raise their children like a Yiddish shtub, and they're little kids since they're 4 or 5, help them in the kitchen. And at least twice a week, my daughter calls me and said, this is what happened, what do I do now? That's what happens when you're dealing with people in a live situation where things can happen. So these party planners, many of them, get these shmunchiks from somebody who's doing it in their own kitchen, with their own kalim, with their own ingredients, and when they run out of something, they go to their neighbor to borrow it. The Rav Machshir has no idea what's going on in there. And I spoke to one of these guys once. I said, do you even go? He said, ich soll dort heranzeiten und kochen mit der Frau? No, so why don't you give hashgacha? So I said, you have a camera? Ich soll nur eine camera? And so it's very difficult. So, so I'm not sure what there is to talk about party planners. If a party planner doesn't have an eingeschlossene hashgacha that actually knows where they're going, when they're going, what they're bringing there, then this is not a hashgacha. But to use one without a hashgacha is absolutely impossible.
There's a lady who makes at home cooking for these things.
Yeah.
She may have to take college after a certain quality.
Yeah, that's a problem. There are many problems, because if the hashgacha is not on top of each of these details, you can have the best intentions in the world. You just simply, you never make it home. The chicken shchit is Baruch Hashem. There is the Mesaris Farms. Mesaris Farms is and because it happens to be that the meat counter at Bingo is serviced by Birdsboro / Mesaris Farms. Mesaris Farms is an excellent chicken shchita. And since it is their outlet is an outlet for their own sechera, you can be very assured that that's what they're selling, besides the fact that you need hashgacha on the packing just to make sure, but there's an extra level of comfort in that. The behemoth flesh that they're selling there is coming from, most of it comes from South America, where almost everything's coming to this. It's very difficult to find domestic meat, behemoth flesh now. It's incredibly expensive. There are the shortages. The shortages are choking. They're choking the market, and people are paying. Kashrus Pesach should pay them back, but people are being charged incredible amounts of money. I go into a butcher shop in Lakewood, and I saw a roast for $200 and something. I said, when I bought my first car cost me $100. Like, I have a difficult time in dealing with a roast that costs twice as much as my car. But Kashrus Pesach, whatever it is. But if you go to Bingo, they have a lot of their imported meat is cheaper, and their shchita in South America is a very good quality, very high quality shchita, so they're certainly fine. Everybody has their own. I have no personal knowledge of the Satan meat, the Fleischgeschäft and things like that. I have no personal knowledge of that. I just assume, Marshall, I know that for all the years that I was involved with the KJ shchita, the Monroe Rebbe was very, very much on top of it and very, very concerned that every time, if there was ever a problem was brought to his attention, he immediately, I'll get to it, immediately responded to it. So just simply based on experiences, I'm going to assume that the KJ, both in the chicken, the chicken has its Karosh Maybe Yisrael, but even their behemoth flesh is perfectly fine. I'm not going to talk about sardines because one of the big differences is that supposedly, I would hope that sardines are fish. Al pi halacha, this isn't just like a chumrah, mishigas. There's a Shitz Hashem, there's a Ravid in the Ramban that says that lahakir simone dogim is the matir on the fish. That just like you take a behema is an eina shechuta. That means if you go to a farm and you see a cow, this is not a kosher animal. It is a kosher min that if you perform shchita, you transform it into a kosher piece of meat. A chicken, according to the Ramban and according to the Ravid, a fish has the same status. That means that until a yid looked at this fish and lahakir simoni was maki that yes, this fish has snapper and keskeses, you're not allowed to eat it. Now, there are a couple of nuances. That means that the Mechaber says that if you have a person who's a mumcha and he can tell by the fish, even without the simonim, that it's kosher, then that's acceptable. And therefore, Rav Yechezkel Auerbach said that salmon, for instance, the pink salmon with the white fat lines is something that's particular to salmon. So even if it doesn't have the skin on, you can be samich on that. Sardines generally that means they swim around with other kinds of fish, including dogfish and baby sharks, which are not kosher. And since there's a ta'arayvis, you need somebody that was made on the hafrada of the ta'arayvis. And hopefully that's what the Haimish Ashkachas do when they go to the sardines. It could be that it's incredibly difficult, tedious work, and it could be that the reason that there was a shortage, I know there was a shortage in the market lately for sardines, because you have to send a team of mashgichim who are going to, as they come out, the ships come in from fishing, and they dump these piles as a gracefully the golas, and you have to go through them. You have to stand on the line, and as they're packing them, a frum yid has to see them one by one. And they can't sugar again. And it could be that they couldn't find mashgichim, and that's why they couldn't send them. It could be that the seichrim, in order to get as many mashgichim as they need, will have to pay, and so have to the lines. Hamish food seichrim are in the business of making money. And if they have an item that's not making them money, they're going to stop making it. It's as simple as that. And it could be that they did. Now, the OU has a different shita, whatever, and they have sardines that don't have mashgichim there. So that's why they were able to have it, and you'll have to find out from the Hamish why they didn't. We see that in European countries there are many lists that's relied on without a hechsher. This is not because they do better work, it's because they have no ability, they have no leverage. You come to a company and you tell them that you want them to do kosher. Now, if the company comes to you because they see a market for their product, so then you sit down, you tell them, I'm glad you came in, here's what you have to do. And you're in the driver's seat. You're telling them what they have to do in order to be kosher. In Europe, the kosher market is so negligible A guy told me, he says, so it's not even worth changing the wrapping. It's not even just to advertise the work. It says, how much am I going to pick up? Another couple of hundred customers. So what they do there, what the Rabbanim do there, is they try to find out of what is going on in the place, what kind of stuff they use, are there any major shilas, minor shilas, how they can deal with the shilas, and they compose lists. They write letters to the companies asking them for information, and based on those responses, the written responses, they will put together the list of what they believe to be a reliable food. It is certainly something that they have to live with because they have no other way. They have no other way of doing it. They simply cannot. They cannot go into companies' demand that they take a hechsher. Is it appropriate for somebody that has the option here in America, that there are literally millions of people that look for a kosher symbol, not only Yidden that are looking to keep kosher, but even other people that think that a kosher symbol means it's cleaner, or that there's more oversight, or they're vegetarians, whatever it should be. But there are people, you come to a company, and the companies know that there is this huge market that they have access to if they have a hashgacha. And therefore, they come along and I've been doing this for 36 years. I could count on less than the fingers of one hand how many companies went bedafka behind our back to try to cheat. Companies have left. Companies have said, you know what, it's too restricting. When the contract expires, forget about it. It's fine. That's good. But somebody here in America to say, listen, this is considered kosher in Europe, that's good enough for me, is a very, very difficult thing, because it's certainly a step down in the hanhaga of what Klal Yisrael should be doing. Next question is about China. There's nothing to discuss about China. Chinese are all thieves and liars, every one of them. If you talk to anybody that does geschäft with them, you know that you can't trust the words that they do. Anybody that handles with them, I've seen interviews with businessmen, they say that they go there because America, unfortunately, they've killed the manufacturing sector, so they have no aid. So they said that he knows, when I make a new invention, new product, he said I have 6 months to make geschäft, because after that, the people that I went to and they signed all these, they're going to steal it and remake it and sell it cheaper somewhere else. I mean, that's it always happens. They have no sense of integrity. So, meshkichim, the hashgachas go there, and I believe it is a kisholon, because no mashgiach is as smart as the Chinaman is crooked. They're born crooked, and they think crooked, and all they do is think how to cheat you, and zehu. Now, if you have a mashgiach who thinks he's smarter than that, okay, maybe he will be once or twice or 3 times, but not every time. And sooner or later, they're going to win and they're going to get something. It's happened that you speak to any mashgiach that's been there, and they sit around, they talk about, I caught him this. Yeah, but you caught him that, how many times you didn't catch him? And it's a friend of mine came here, he had a certain chef. He found by mistake, he went down to the docks, they were getting a container of product, and there was a second container. He says, "What? That can't be." He says, "I only made 1 container." They opened it, had the same markings, the same labels, the same date, the same lot number, same everything. It was totally fraudulent. So there's very little talk about China. One thing is clear: a person who buys food from China, lost at Lovoi, when it comes to the Din Cheshbon, will not be able to say what I mean had a hechsher, because a person who eats from China, it brings the dam of all Reshe. And the hashgachas that go there will have to give Din Cheshbon. So many things can go wrong with matzah baking at Kashrus Pesach. That's absolutely true. And the fields, the harvesting, at every step, there is something absolutely shocking. I've been working in matzah bakeries for over 65 years. I used to run away from yeshiva when I was in Chassam Seifa. I used to run away when I was 10 years old. I used to run away from yeshiva to go work in the Polish matzah bakery down in the basement where Belchon and Wassen's used to bake matzahs. And for the first time in my life, this year I heard that there was a shortage of workers, so the Heimish matzah bakeries are using Goyim to work. They have a Yiddish Vernemer, the guy that does the Lisha, and you have a Yiddish Shiber, They say that's enough to do lishma, because as long as you start the malacha and you finish the malacha lishma, this I couldn't believe it. I asked 2 or 3 different people, and they said that it's taka true. And I asked one matzah baker, and he said, "Yeah, what should we do? If you want, you pay more. We'll get other workers, we'll get Yiddish workers." So make sure that your matzahs are coming from places that are being worked on by Yidden. But with things that can go wrong, starting from the field, we have here an Eid Neman, and the first person testimony is somebody that if you're really serious about what you're doing and you want to do it, then combines, first of all, the Ketzira itself, which has to be done lishma. Is it ma'akiv? It's not ma'akiv. Would you like to have a Yiddish combine driver so that at least he knows he's doing the lishma? Yeah. An upki hitting the hashgacha will make sure that the person that's driving the combine and working the levers and working the controls to make sure that the ketzira is done lishma, because according to some shittas, the lishma aspect of matzah starts right away at every aspect, including the ketzira. The ketzira and the techina and the glisha and the baking, all of that is one long process. So there are those that are makbid dafka to have that. But even before you get there, you have to make sure that the wheat in the field, if there is a Messiah, or when you go out to the field, until you have to know whether or not it's been rained on. You have to know whether or not it's damp, whether or not it's, because once it is loy nitzrichel karka, once you have the sheaves of wheat, which are not, and they're drawing unique anymore, if it rains on that a significant amount, not gefährlich, a significant amount, it can be nechmas in the field or on the stalk. And if you're not keeping cheshbon where it rained, when it rained, and you're not going to see that right away. So that's something you have to be careful about. Obviously, the cleaning, because you'll have other stuff, you have to make sure the stuff is clean so that the wheat kernels are only kernels. The grinding, the techina has to be done lishma, whether it's going to be a rechaim shalyad or even a rechaim melchona. These things are all, you have to make sure it's clean, and that's all you're getting. And the baking, it's very important. There are details at every one about having the lisha, about making sure that there's a separation between the water, the mayim shalana. I know of a bakery that they repiped the water, the mayim shalana system, and the Rav Yechezkel didn't realize it, and for years the water that they were using to make each lisha was being drawn directly from the city water. There was no mayim shalana for years, and the guy wasn't aiming on it. And then you have other things about how long it takes, how long it sits on the table, what's considered asek, what's considered that it's just sitting there, what's considered piataner. There are millions of details, and obviously each person has to ask their Rav for direction, what they're going to do that. Kashrus Pesach has flooded the markets. I think people should be makbid that they should, the Kashrus Pesach pizza and pretzels and waffles that they buy should be mamish like their grandmother was makbid on buying in the Heim, because then there's no problem. Other than that, you shouldn't be doing it. Shamefully, people eat all types of cakes and cookies, crafted pretzel, pizzas, noodles. It's very difficult for a person to say they're upgehitten when they buy all this stuff. I'm not saying you have to grow your own vegetables and grind your own, make your own matzahs, but for a person to go out and buy anything on the shelf that says Kashrus Pesach, hey, make a cheshbon. There are a couple of thousand Kashrus Pesach products. Every product, because they're not simple, if I care, Pesach is worse, because since you're not using wheat flour, you need something else that's going to give it body, that's going to give it chaymer. So you have xanthan gum, you have sargo gum, you have other types of things, you have guar gum, you have mamish, all kinds of things you don't even know what they are, and they need it because you have to make something of it, or else it gets sabrekulin. If you don't put this stuff in, it falls apart as soon as you put it in the package. And so if you have a couple of thousand products, and each of them have a number of ingredients, you have thousands. Now, a person in their lifetime, the Tanya talks about being a Beinani. What an incredible mile it is to be a Beinani. A Beinani is someone who only makes mistakes 40% of the time. It's a Beinani. Right? So let's say you think that you're eating food where they only make mistakes about the Kashrus Pesach status of the products only 40% of the time. Right? They're Beinani, they're not bad, right? The more you have, it's just incremental. There's an algorithm that's working against you. You're going to have to end up with something that you shouldn't have had because you're the gatekeeper in your house. And to teach our children, when I was growing up, there was another thing. You had potatoes and you had eggs and you had matzah. And, you know, if you didn't like that, then you can have eggs and then potatoes and matzah. But that was the end of the story. They didn't have all these things. And Baruch Hashem, matzah's durchgelebt, and without the pizza and without the waffle. So there's very little to talk about here. People think that because they have, it's coming from gluten-free places. Gluten-free places have all sorts of other things going on there. That is, it's to clarify would take another couple of days about how these things work out. Basic stuff like sugar, salt, spices, and cocoa are acceptable for Shabbos. For Pesach rather? Sugar, salt, single spices, with the exception of paprika and cinnamon, because paprika and cinnamon, they frequently will have to spray something on it as they're grinding it to keep down the dust. Interestingly enough, not black pepper, but but single spices, except for those things that are ungenommen as kidneys. There, for instance, coriander. There are certain things that were always ungenommen by Klal Yisrael to be considered kidneys, and the reason for that is there are three different criterion for something being called kidneys. And first of all, the list of kidneys is not something that's written in magic marker, and you can rub it out and put it on. If something is kidneys, then it's kidneys. If it's not kidneys, you can't stop go scribble it on the end of the list because it makes you feel happy. So you have things that are ungenommen. For instance, I just saw somebody just got a video this morning. They have in Eretz Yisrael, they have rice that the Sephardim use because they use it. And there's a video of the Meshkiach. The fifth time they go through it, the Erlicha, the other ones that they say, it says Kashrus Pesach, they just take it off the shelf and use it. The Erlicha go through it. The fifth time he went out, he was showing the kernels of wheat that he found in there. In the way, now this is a shadow of mamish and isa daraisa of chometz. You cook that, and it's not bottled for Pesach. And if you forget the kivegi with the chaz veneer, it's a whole berry. It's a whole berry of wheat berry that's sitting there waiting to eat it. So you certainly, it's a very chancy thing. And what some people do, there are certain spices that they say, even though it was always ungenommen that it's kidneys, but lemaisa, they have a triple spiral, an ear, they blow it up and it separates out. Okay. But lemaisa is not a simple thing to ignore the Messiah of Klal Yisrael. When something is considered a kidney, I remember many years ago, my parents, Olayim Shalom, lived in Netanya when they retired. And when I came for Shabbos, the Alta Klausenberger Rebbe was still alive, but he wasn't well enough to speak anymore. So they used to put out before Shabbos, they would put out papers of the Divrei Torah that he used to say, the Divrei Yatziv on his shiurim. And I saw in there that he said that he was told by his Zayd, the Divrei Chaim. He says that before he fears Zayin and Minig and Sounds, I'm not sure, the number was well over 100, I think it was like 120. He says before he flances Zayin and Minig and Sounds, he has over 100 reasons, benigla and benister, why he's doing it. So you don't mess with a minig in Klal Yisrael. If there's a minig that something is considered kidneys, and it's not your minig to eat kidneys, so you don't just go say, well, I'll clean it up and it'll be fine. I'm not sure where quinoa fits into that, but the sushi part is where you have to have it, so that's a problem.
What about the oil? The oil from kidneys.
So oil from kidneys, actually, Rav Moshe writes in the Tshuvos, he mentions it in passing, he's not saying you should use it. He says that in the Litta there was always the minig was to use the oil from like peanut oil and things like that. It was the minig to use because it was not, there's no concern of having none of that. Because of the three things you have kidneys, you have to have mini de midgun. That means that you have to, you store it in the silo and harvest it and use it as you would grain. Or if it's nitchan, it's ground, and you end up with flour, and use that the way you use flour. Or the third thing is where it's grown together consecutively with wheat, and it can end up in the same harvest because you end up with anything. So, but none of those apply to oil, so that's why they were. But it's drifted away from there. Nobody that I know is matter using oils. There are questions here of what can be used on Pesach with or without hashgachas. Parchment paper is a problem all year. Parchment paper and the cooking paper cups that you use to make cupcakes. The reason for that is, and this slops over into this rash about paper goods. Paper good is made b'derech klal. They're made of wood fibers, cellulose, and these fibers need something to stick them together, and there is frequently starches are used. It is almost unknown, less than 1% anywhere in the world, that they use wheat starch in the process of making paper. That 1%, by the way, is in China. It's almost unknown to use wheat starch. They do use kitnious starches because the purpose of those starches is that it chemically bonds itself to the wood fibers and the cellulose fibers. That's called the wet end of the process. Now, when they want to make it waterproof, they have to add certain fatty acids. It's called a ketone dimer that they add to the slurry, and that bonds itself, and it's an oil. It makes like an oil-proof surface when they finally press it out. Now, the ketone dimers can be coming from non-kosher oil, so that is why it's not reasonable to use a person who's upgehitten would be very difficult justifying using a baking paper that has any percentage of non-kosher in it. Now, the good news is that it's always used in such small quantities that even if it had been used, it'll be bottled. You're never going to get a situation where b'di'evid it will asa the food. But certainly, lechatchila, in a kitchen where people berimenzich, that they try to be as careful as possible, they should make sure that the paper goods that they're using for baking should have a hechsher on it, the oven-proof papers. And for the same reason, this starch, what there's a tumult that you can't use paper, you can't use paper towels, you can't use paper cups, paper plates. One guy came along and he said he remembers when he was in 8th grade, they said that if you put iodine on something, if it turns blue, that means it has starch in it. So he took a paper plate and he put iodine on it. He says, yeah, that's very nice, but it's any kind of starch. That means that even the wood also has starch. And what is showing up blue is that there's wood starch in there. It doesn't make anything. And the starch is, first of all, it's nifsal me'achilas kelev because they blend it with an alkaline, and the slurry itself is not. It's going to be bottled, first of all, numerically. Rabbi Yechezkel said kama times that the idea, the concept of bitul b'shishim is only negay of food. If it's not a food item, you go back to the deraisa, it's bottle chad betray. This is incredibly important about medicines, about products that you have that are not food items. If something is not a food item and it's something to be bottled b'roiv before Pesach, certainly kitnius, which lechatchila, I mean, you can't go bimvatla, but it's certainly, if kitnius ends up in your product, it's bottle b'roiv, not b'shishim, it's bottle b'roiv. I know there's a certain hashgacha told me, no, they're not putting shishim. They're making up their own Torah. Reb Chaim Shmulevitz said that the reason that the same pasuk, the Baal Tosef and Baal Sigra, the iser of adding and subtracting chas v'shalom from mitzvahs in the same pasuk, Rav Chaim said it's because it's the same thing. You think you're smarter than the Kadosh Baruch Hu, you're smarter than Torah. I'm not going to take it away. I'll be frumer. You can't. Being frumer is by definition making a mistake in what the Rebbeinu Shalom wants you to do. So to make up that you're going to be makbar on shishim on kidneys before Pesach is not eisgehalten. But it's certainly in the paper making industry, the starch bonds itself chemically to the fibers that are locked into the paper. It's very difficult to assume that anything will escape. Wax paper is b'chlal lo shaila because the wax is just paraffin. Foil sheets and aluminum foil is the same, that even though they're going to be using an oil, it's a stamping oil that they use to grind it with, and it's a petrochemical. Plastic bags, the only shaila you have is that sometimes you have plastic bags which will have starch inside. Usually that happens when you have what's called a cryovac. When you buy frozen fish or frozen meat, they come in a vacuum pack, And those, in order to slide it, they in the company, in order to slide it into the bags, when they're packing it, they have starch inside so that you open it up and it slides right in. Now, it's not going to be wheat starch. So what you end up doing, if you buy before Pesach, if something that like mushal, if let's say you go to, if you have let's say a chachmein of Bereisheh, and the prices around Hanukkah is about half of what it's going to be Erev Pesach, and you buy your meat and your chicken then, and you keep it in the freezer, so when you take it out before Pesach and wash it off, just in case there was any starch there before, you wash it off and there's no more of a problem with that. Regular plastic bags that you buy, the storage bags, the baggies, these things have no starch in them. Disposable gloves have to be marked starch-free on the packaging. Aluminum pans are fine. The stamping oil is not a problem. If you use it more than once or twice, you might want to consider titling it. Because I was working with an acquaintance of mine, and he did a velt of work on those who say "En etzrichem tefillah," and it's very difficult to find even something that's b'di'evid "En etzrichem tefillah."
What about plates from China with designs on it that you put in pack?
With what, ink?
Yeah. You have nice plates from China and designs, ink.
Does it come off in the food? So why would you want to use it in the first place? Oh, okay. So then it must be kosher. But the aluminum plates, it's interesting. It's machlekes b'chlal whether you have to taivel it. But if you hold you have to taivel it, you should consider taiveling without a bracha, because interestingly enough, obviously, if one of the big heterim that the hashgachas use is they say that the metal belongs to a yid, so it's just a guy doing it. So there are a number of problems with that. There's something called kind of b'shvach kli. That means that when an uman makes the kli, he owns it automatically until he's paid off, and then you're buying it from the guy. Also, you have to make a kinyan. It's not pashut that you can make a kinyan or metaltalim with moment from a guy, and certainly you have to pay dollar value. And then in China, there is a law that there is a specific list of lawyers that are authorized to draw up contracts, and the contracts have to be in Chinese. And if not, the sale is bottled. And even though it's machlekes rishayim, what's called dina machus dina, everybody agrees that commercial law is certainly something that's under the gather of dina machus dina. And if they say that if you're not following these rules, the mechira is not a mechira, so the whole thing is bottled. There you go. Balloons. I understand. I've never turned the balloon inside out, but somebody has told me they do have starch, and maybe we'll be careful not to blow up balloons on Pesach. Kitchen gloves, the same thing. The ones with the felt inside are not a problem, but the ones that have starch are. Corrugated bakeware, interestingly enough, has corrugated bakeware. In case you're not aware, when you can buy these forms that come this like a heavy paper. And in order to give it strength, it has like zigzags on the outside that are glued to the inner filler. That glue has starch. So if you're not using paper because you think it has starch, so does the glue that's made for there. It also has starch. Disposable aprons was always a good idea. New pots. I would assume that you are talking about. There were some ra'ananus that they use chalev. They use alya to shine the farbware pots. They just talk about it. Nobody ever found out that it's true. There's no reason to assume it. So if you want to be machmer and you make a hagala on it, you certainly don't need more than that. Since even if it got hot, the bli was not al yedei eish. It's not so posh. You could probably even do with an iri cleavage. Meat and fish stores, to put absorbent materials in foam trays, those are nothing, except that they are blue with sear, which is just miyah, so you get rid of it. Cast iron pots. Baruch Hashem, Klal Yisrael discovered sourdough challah for $25 a loaf. Lahagdil peri la'adira. And the problem is, the way that you make cast iron is that it is made it is not made like stainless steel. Stainless steel is an alloy which contains within it, in this finished product, something that wards off. It does not allow for it to get rusty and to get, that's what's called stainless. Cast iron is a very pashut to metal, And in fact, if it's left exposed to the air, it's going to oxidize, it's going to rust. So what they do is that when they make, and it's also, by the way, it's very porous, which is a great thing because companies go crazy when you try to tell them you have to kasher. They say, "What do you mean you have to kasher? This is metal. Metal does it's not wood. It's not going to absorb anything." And but let me say, they realize, and after you talk it over, you see that cast iron does absorb, and in order to make sure that it doesn't rust, as soon as the cast iron pot, griddle, whatever it is that you're having, the Dutch oven, any of those things, as soon as it's finished, they do something called seasoning. That means they take oil, they smear it on the oil, then they heat it up again, and it gets absorbed into the thing, and it makes like a finish on the surface of the oil so that it does not get rusty. Most cast iron products today are coming from China, and the oils in China are certainly nechshad to be made from Shem Menachai, or certainly even if it's not, even if they say using vegetable oil, it's made in kalim that are also used for non-kosher oils. So therefore you have to make a full libun chomer. The good news is that's relatively easy because you put it in an oven with a self-cleaning cycle and you burn it out, but then you have to season it again. There is one company called Lodge. It's one of the oldest cast iron companies in the United States, and it has been checked out numerous times, and they use vegetable oil, linseed kosher oil, to season their stuff. So if you have to buy any of it, you buy a Lodge pot, and then you can make as much sourdough challah as you like. Lipstick. Lipstick and lip balms. I'll tell you, people call me all the time about that, and I tell them very simply, the original chapstick, the unflavored original chapstick is kosher. There's nothing in there that's not kosher. And if you want something flavored, because it's impossible to actually find out. I mean, people call, they call Rabbanim, they call agencies, they call to ask questions because they want to have Shalom Alinashi. I checked it out, I asked about it. It is actually, the only thing you can get is an educated guess. You'll never get a real answer because no company is going to tell you what the flavors are that they're using. The flavors, the fragrance people, the people that compound fragrances are flavor chemists who flunked out of school and never became flavorists, so they make fragrances and they shtup around for a fragrance. They'll have 80, 90 different chayimrim of who knows what they can put in there. So if you're using it for soap, gesundheit, but if you're putting it on your lips, there are heterim. I'm not disagreeing that there are people that are matir, and they say that usually, for instance, I'm not going to get to the flavors, but let's say the colors. The only color problem you're going to have is something called carmine, which is made from squished up bugs. And why somebody who's a fancy feinschmecker wants to put pieces of squished up bugs on their lips, I have no idea. But this is nice to by them for some reason. But Lemaisa, the only thing, and they never have that alone. You're going to have zevzagayrim. You're going to have that it's not a psik because or else in 5 minutes then you'd have nothing left on the lipstick. And it's not a psik it's not nichale, and it's not. So is there a heta for using it? Yes, there is a heta for using it. But I just don't understand why somebody. There are Baruch Hashem, plenty of cosmetics that are made of kosher products. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, aside for the klola of giving us vegans and vegetarians, the good thing about it is that Klal Yisrael, because there is a demand for vegan cosmetics, you can look for something that is vegan and you'll know that it's going to be kosher, and because that will be the only problem you can run into. On Pesach, it's very difficult to assume that something like that is to use lipstick on Pesach that doesn't have a hechsher is something that I don't even bother wasting time for, because for a couple of days you can make do. You don't like it's not the exact color, stay home. Lotion on hands. There has to be. It's an interessante Sache because there's a halacha called tefech al menas latfiach. In order for something to have some sort of mamoshes, we're not dealing here with you makabel a maga, a tumah by being in the same room with your hands. So if you put on lotion and you rub it into your hands, there's mamish nothing there, so it doesn't transfer. There has to be enough to transfer. If there's enough to transfer from your hands to the food, you're using too much lotion anyways. But there's no reason to be concerned. Over the counter, Tylenol, Motrin. There is somebody in Los Angeles, his name is Rav Yechezkel Auerbach, friend of mine, who does a wealth of work for Pesach, checking out things. And some of the things that he keeps an eye on, when he deals regularly with Tylenol and Motrin, to make sure that they are kosher. Now, I know that somebody came out with kosher make-believe Tylenol, the acetaminophen. Now, acetaminophen is just the name of the medicine that's in there. The main problem is glycerin. If the glycerin is not treif, it is just as good as anything else. So if a person has in their home, they have the Tylenol or the Motrin, the name brands, that is certainly kosher, and certainly you can use it. Vitamins, interestingly, is a machlekes in Ramesh and Rabbi Yankov about vitamins. I believe, I always thought it was Rabbi Yankov. Somebody told me it was actually Ramesh that held this shita. He said that, because it sounds so much like Rabbi Yankov, that he said that the reason you take vitamins is because food has been so diminished by they don't grow it right, they don't pack it right, they pick it when it's not yet ripe in order to get it to the market. And a lot of the benefit that the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted people to get from these fruits and vegetables are actually diminished by the processing, so we take vitamins to make up for what we took out of it. First you destroy the food, then you take vitamins. So he said, in Cain, the vitamins are a type of food. So if it's food, it is subject to all the halachas of food. That means there's no bitul b'roiv. That means it has to be kosher kedin. And the benefit is you can take it on Shabbos. Because if it's a food, you can take it on Shabbos. The other man, the Amr, held it, no. He says it's like any other thing, that people are they're more lachashed, they're more drained, so they take these vitamins as a sort of a medication. It's not a prescription medication, but it's medication. And since it's a medication, it's bottle chad b'trei. You don't have to come with the shishim, but you're not allowed to take it on Shabbos. So there's ups and downs in both of these. Most vitamins are going to. It's too big a con. You can't just say vitamins. There are some vitamins that have l'mashal chondroitin or other things like that are seriously non-kosher. Now the question is, can you take it anyways? Because, for instance, on Yom Tif, Pesach, medications, there's no shum Pesach in the world that says you cannot take medications on Pesach because it's treif, if it's a medication that your doctor has prescribed. Now, what that means is like this. If you're going to take pills or capsules, you're taking something that is not a midid achila, and you're consuming it in a way which is not a derech achila. So, every Pesach that we consulted with said that without a question, you're allowed to do that. You run into a problem with soft gels, which is a problem with vitamin D3. D3, by the way, happens to be a very important nutritional aspect of muscle and bone, stuff like that, and elderly people are frequently given D3. Now, they're given it in soft gels. The reason they give it in soft gels is because D3 is an oil-soluble vitamin, and in oil, it's very difficult to put oil into a capsule, so that's how they developed this whole technology of soft gels. The problem is like this. So soft gels are made out of gelatin. If you have gelatin that is baked into a hard capsule, every Pesach we spoke to said that it's absolute. The only Pesach I know that says it's us is Rav Henkin. Rav Henkin said it has the Nevachshevei, which is astonishing and difficult to understand how it's Achshevei. You're not taking a derech achil, you don't. But other than Rav Henkin, every other Pesach holds that once you make it into a hard capsule, you're allowed to take it without a question. Now, the problem is that soft gels are kishmaikachu. It's a soft thing. It's midid achili. You can chew it. You can eat it, and it's difficult to give that the same status as the hard gelatin capsule. So with the D3, you have one of two aces. You can either buy the Yiddish drugstores have empty vegetarian capsules, and you take a triple O. You'll put it. You can take because the D3 is usually very small. You can slip it in there, and you draw it, and it has the din of sieve. the Gemara says that like by an oif tameh, it's only mitama in the base of bliya. So if you wrap it in a sieve and you swallow it, you're not tummy. So they shtel it to that if it's like inside another capsule, so it's not something. So I heard just yesterday one of the poskim hold not like that, but l'maisa, that's the general consensus, is that if you put it inside another capsule, that is perfectly fine. Liquids are a problem. Liquids are a problem because it has a flavor, and it's very difficult to say it's not hechsher if it tastes good. It tastes sweet, it tastes good, and with liquids you have to check up that the product is going to be acceptable. If it's a medicine, even a medicine with a flavor is not going to be a problem, because you go b'asar rov, and in my career I've probably reviewed between 30 and 40,000 different flavor formulas, and I doubt if there were 5 that were treif after the tarevis in the food at the end. This is always going to be bottled. You don't give a hechsher on food that way, but certainly for a medication, that's certainly enough, and it's certainly difficult to say hechsher in them. Coffee. I'm sorry? That's a real problem. The reason for that is that the decaffeinating process takes place in one of 2 ways: either with something called the Swiss water process, where they wash it out, they dissolve out the caffeine, or they dissolve it in a much harsher way. We're using something called ethyl acetate. Ethyl acetate is a compound which has both ethanol, which is an alcohol, and acetic acid, which is a fermentation product made using starches. And so if ethyl acetate, even if it's not chametz, is absolutely going to end up being kidneys. And if you are going to soak your coffee beans in a kidneys before Pesach, it's not something that you would do. So, no. If you have decaf that uses a Swiss water method with a good hechsher, then you know that you can use it. I know at the KSA we have 1 or 2 companies that actually do what they're I can't give it the commercial, you're not going to find that, but hopefully there are people that do. The only one that I know of that's on the market right now is the decaf from Taster's Choice, which is done by a very poor hechsher.
One question: decaf, most of the distributors are going, or they try
not going.
Sell that.
That's a real problem.
And after Pesach, you drink all these liquor.
Yeah.
And it's
so you go to a frum liquor store who buys his stuff before Pesach and he sells it with his Rav, and then you can. That's exactly what we started off with. Thank you. It's I'm sorry? I've never seen it. I don't know. I've never been to a self Pesach, but the only one that I saw is the Taster's Choice decaf from Korea with the square chug. Yeah, it's a very poor hechsher. Very poor hechsher. I'm sorry? Okay. If you can get something like that, that's, again, I don't drink decaf coffee. I drink a lot of coffee, but none of it is decaf. Okay. I just wanted to get to, before we wrap up, I just wanted to get to one thing that people, coffee, because this I get calls about all the time. Coffee, if coffee is made in a professional fashion, that means that, let's say you go to a Starbucks or probably even Dunkin' Donuts, where you have these huge carafes. The problem with the coffee, the problem you can run into with coffee is one of kalim, not of kashrus in the item itself. Coffee is just coffee and water is just water. What you can run into is if you have these, like these fancy feinschmecker coffees, lattes, platzi, I don't even know what they're called, where they use these little zachen, they cook up the milk and they smear it around. Then these kalim share a dishwasher with all the other trefa stuff they sell there. That could be a problem. The urns that they make the coffee in does not fit in a dishwasher, and even if it did, it wouldn't wash the inside. They do a clean in place. So plain black coffee is not going to be a problem in these things. Now, if you go to a corner, you're stuck in Harlem, and you see like a little bodega in the corner, and the guy sitting there making coffee, and yesterday he cooked his tuna fish in there, you don't even know what else he used that carafe for, that would be a problem. Hotels, making coffee in your room in a hotel, I just read an article about how actually dangerous it is because they never clean them. The things. There are two places they say are incredibly dangerous to make coffee. One is a small these coffee makers in your room in the hotel or a motel. The other is on an airplane, because they never clean out. They just keep on adding water to the reservoir, and any bacteria and anything that's there just grows and stays and stays. If you do have to have a coffee, there is one way to make it. In an airplane, you can ask the attendants that they have in the galley, not during lunchtime, in the galley they have a spigot with hot water, and you can take a paper cup, ask them to make instant coffee, that you can use. The other stuff, because they have these carafes, those goes into the dishwasher. It could be a real balagan. So that's something as far as that. There's another thing that Klal Yisrael has been very, very confused about. Somebody decided that flour is chametz gomer, and not only is the chametz gomer, and not only to have in your shus, but it used to be that when you wanted to make sure something was kosher after Pesach, it said gebacken nach Pesach. By the way, make sure you know which year it is, because last year, it's not so funny. Last year somebody was sticking going gebacken nach Pesach, and he meant last year's Pesach. And the problem is that flour, now they want gemola nach Pesach. It is absolutely not true, not in the Metzias and not in the Halacha, that tempering wheat turns it into chametz, vade chametz. It absolutely is not true. The Gemara says, it is clear in the Gemara from Kam Mishnayos that they used to do what's called timdon, where they would temper the wheat before they ground it, and the Gemara says that it's not kosher for matzahs mitzvahs, but stam kemach menashuk. If you have nothing else to do, you can make matzah on Pesach. Clearly, kemach is not chametz gomer. It's worth maybe a suffix, not even that, because if you temper wheat kernels and you leave them, they show no signs of chimutz. So somebody told me, yeah, but maybe in 6 months it'll show signs of chimutz. That's not the halacha. You can't make up. I forget who said it. I don't want to mention it by name. He says, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And the fact is that it's simply not chametz. So there is a couple of other last things. We did tuna, fresh fish. Okay, here's the halacha. The fresh fish from a Goyish store is a simple halacha, that if you walk into a store and they have a number of, and by the way, this is one of the reasons that, for instance, there's a place called Aldi's. I don't know if they have any here. I'm sorry? So in Aldi's, they sell fresh vacuum-packed fish, a salmon. Now, this comes from a salmon farm. Farmed salmon avoids the problems of anisakis, if there were any, and then also, since they're only working on their own stuff, you don't have to worry about the knives that they're doing is cutting other stuff. You walk into ShopRite, and on the counter there, they have verschiedene types of fish, and with the same knife that the guy's cutting a catfish, he's also going to cut this. Unless there's a hashgacha. I'm sorry? If there's a separate, most ShopRites do not have a separate kosher department. I'm saying you go into a fish store and the guy has the fish in it, but the halacha makes an allowance for that. The halacha says that you ask the guy to rub off his the knife, and if you shemzach, so you buy the piece of fish, and it says that you meshafshef it. You can take a paper towel and with water you just rub the ends, whatever is the knife touched, and then you're ready to go. Sushi, seaweed, this is something I don't understand. I mean, it's clearly so that if you buy inferior grade sushi, you're going to end up having pressed into the sushi. You're going to end up with sheretz hamayim. It's there. It's always there. I've seen whole seahorses squashed up into that things, little ones. So certainly that's the bad news. The good news is that it's durchsichtig. It's transparent. And if you hold it up to the light, you can see something there. You take the point of a knife, you flick it out, and you're done. So it's a davar mah, so you don't have to worry about the blias and things like that. Now, any hashgacha worth its salt is not going to make sushi, no matter what the hashgacha is on the nori, until they check the nori sheets. I mean, it takes a second. If you make 100 things, 500, they'll take it an hour. You sit there, the mashgiach with the light, you can. So I would hope that hashgachas are careful about that and they're checking it. If I were you, I would, if you do feel, I don't know why, maybe you feel the need to have sushi, you're going to ask, if there's no yid there, so you have no business being in the same store as a place that's selling kosher food without a yid. But if the yid is there, you ask him, does anybody check the nori sheets? If he says that's ridiculous, I would believe. If he says that he checks them, then it's a very simple thing to do. Lox, salmon, it is very simple because since lox is cold smoked, b'derech klal, there's very, very little shilas that can come up with lox. You take one look at the meat, at the fish, and you see that it's salmon. And since it's cold smoked, it's never going to be a problem with bishalakum. However, there are other ones that say they're cold smoked, such as trout or sable or these things, which are hot smoked and cold smoked. So that will vensach already. If there is the Ramah says that if you cook something till it's royal that it's no longer subject to bishalakum, so then you can change the means of cooking it and continue. So what some of the agencies do, which is absolutely legitimate, nice galton halacha, they will cold smoke the fish until it's royal achila, and then they will hot smoke it so that it gets the tam of the smoke. That's perfectly legitimate. There is at least one hashgacha that feels that, because it says kavish re'ek mevushel. If you do kavish on fish in a brine, then it's enough. Then even if you hot smoke it later, it's mutter. You have to know whether or not when you find something. And it looks funny because, for instance, if you have hot smoked salmon coming from Norway and you know that there aren't enough mashkichim there to hot smoke, you check out with the hashgacha how they are making sure there's no problem with bishalakum. There's an easy way out, and I know, for instance, the Chavkei, and we at the KSA, we had a place in Alaska that we did this. It was a vegestalt in such a way that there was cold smoke until it was done, and then the hot smoke was added just to give it a little taste. Other than that, I just want to be Messiah again and thank the bold mishpacha. Should be a zechus for the refuah shlema of all Chayli Yisrael, especially those that need it, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give them more kaiches to be mizak the Klal Yisrael.
Mordig Ashir. Shay Ming should like to thank Rav Yechezkel Auerbach, Shlita, the Kashrus administrator of the KSA, for the wonderful, important Shia of Kashrus that's going all over the world with Yahzekal Israel. Abraham Kashrus Matkush Barazak Solavegi Hibram Mitzvah Shanam Rovas Man Tzitkoy Yagdel Torah V'Yadi Kaddish.